Hey everybody, welcome into episode 23 of Awakening the Ordinary. My name is Daniel Clower, and it is officially my favorite time of year. And if you know me, you know that means one thing: the Muppet Christmas Carol. It is, without question, the best version of the story. Michael Caine acting his heart out while talking to a felt puppet frog. I mean, that's peak cinema. But because this show is called Awakening the Ordinary, I couldn't just watch the movie this year. No, this year I went down a research rabbit hole. See, as I was watching the movie and sort of trying to wrap my head around this absolute destitute poverty that Bob Cratchit was facing, it made me want to do some research. So I started looking into the economics of London in the 1840s when Charles Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol, and I wanted to compare that to some of the economic trends in 2025 in America. And in doing so, I found something that honestly kind of broke my brain a little bit. We all know the story. I mean, Ebenezer Scrooge is the ultimate villain. He is the face of greed. I mean, if there was a Mount Rushmore of avarice and greed in fictional media, Scrooge would be on it for sure. And Bob Cratchit is the face of poverty. He's Scrooge's only employee. He's freezing in his office. He can't afford medicine for his ailing son, Tiny Tim, because healthcare is just too expensive, if that sounds familiar to any of you. I mean, he's destitute. But let's look at the math. In 1843, Bob Cratchit was paid 15 shillings a week. And that sounds like nothing, basically. But when economists adjust that for relative labor value, which is basically taking both inflation and actual spending power into account, Bob Cratchit was making the modern equivalent of about $45,000 a year. Now, he was working 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, so it's a little different, obviously, but if you break down that $45,000 a year into our modern day 5 days a week, 40 hours a week work week, that's about $21.60 an hour. Just to remind you, the federal minimum wage in the United States in the year of our Lord 2025 is $7.25 an hour. We have built an economic system where the destitute victim of a 180-year-old ghost story was earning 3 times what we legally allow our lowest wage workers to earn today. And Ebenezer Scrooge, the bad guy, the symbol of unthinkable amounts of biblical levels of greed, Mr. Humbug himself? Well, historians estimate that based on the tax laws and brackets for extremely wealthy and successful businessmen in the 1840s, he would be making about 30 times what Bob Cratchit made. Today, the average S&P 500 CEO makes 272 times what their workers make. And that's even more so when you compare the wage to the lowest earner of a corporation. And at some companies like Starbucks, the ratio has actually hit about 6,600 to 1. If Bob Cratchit walked into a modern American corporation today with a ratio of a scant 30 to 1 on his income versus the CEO's, he wouldn't be a charity case. He would be the guy that everybody in the office was incredibly jealous of. So, in today's episode, I want to pull the curtain back a little bit on why 1843 London seems to look like a worker's paradise compared to the ultra-capitalism of the United States in 2025. We are constantly told that billionaires earn their wealth, that they just work harder than the rest of us, or are smarter, or have better training, or simply make better financial decisions. So let's do a little thought experiment. I want you to imagine that you landed the greatest dream job in the history of the world. You are making $10,000 an hour, guaranteed 40 hours a week. So you're going to be pulling in $400,000 a week. And let's say you are a super diligent worker. You work 40 hours every single week, 52 weeks a year. You never take a vacation. You never call out sick. How long do you think you would have to work that job to make $1 billion? You can pause here if you want. Make a guess. It would take you 48 years. 48 years of making $10,000 every single hour you work just to hit 1 billion. But that is not nearly the limit in the United States. No, we have people in this country worth hundreds of billions of dollars. To earn what Elon Musk, for example, is worth in 2025 at that same rate of $10,000 an hour, 40 hours a week, you would have had to start your job 19,200 years ago. So you'd be punching in the Stone Age, and you'd be working all the way through the invention of the wheel, the building of the pyramids. You could take your lunch break with Cleopatra and Alexander the Great. You get to see the fall of Rome, the Industrial Revolution, maybe say hi to Bob Cratchit on the way. And the whole time making $10,000 an hour just to catch up to what one man is worth in the United States. No, nobody can earn $1 billion. You collect $1 billion by capturing the value of everyone else's labor. That is not productivity. That is a structural vacuum cleaner designed entirely to focus wealth to the top percentage. But it's not just your money they're taking, it's your life. In 1930, there was a famous economist named John Maynard Keynes. And he looked at the way that technology was advancing and he made a prediction. He said that by the year 2030, just around the corner, the, quote, economic problem would be solved. He essentially predicted that technology would be so efficient that our biggest crisis would be boredom because we would only need to work 15 hours a week at most. That basically we were going to be living in a post-scarcity society. So where's that 15-hour work week? I mean, he was right. Technology did get that advanced. We have AI now, automation, logistics systems that would look like magic to Keynes. But instead of working less, somehow, the average American worker is working more than most other developed nations in the world. In America, the average worker logs about 1,800 hours a year. Our friends across the pond in Germany, on average, work 465 hours less every year. That's 3 months of extra labor every year. So where is all of that extra time dividend going? Well, if you paid any attention at all, you already know. It was siphoned off. It's going to the elites. If a computer makes your job 10 times faster, you don't get to go home 10 times earlier. The owner of the company just gets to make 10 times more profit. Billionaires buy their time and their life back with private jets, personal wait staff, personal chefs, whereas you sell your life in 8-hour increments just to pay for health insurance. We aren't working to survive anymore. Keynes was right. We are on the dead verge of a post-scarcity society. But let's rewind again, Because if you want to understand how ultra-capitalism works in 2025, you have to look at the 19th century company town. Back then, coal and textile barons realized that they could make even more money if they owned the workers' entire life. They built the houses, they owned the grocery stores, and instead of paying you in legal tender, they paid you in company scrip. Fake money that you could only use to purchase company store property. It was a closed loop. You worked for the boss, and then you gave your paycheck right back to the boss for rent and food. You could never save. You could never scrape together any actual accumulation of wealth, so you could never leave. Now, today, of course, we look back on that as a dark stain on our history, a sort of barbarism that somehow made its way into near modern life. But look at Walmart right now. Walmart is the largest employer in the United States. In many states, about 15% of Walmart's workforce is on Medicaid or SNAP. So think about that for a second. Walmart pays wages so low that the worker can't afford to eat or see a doctor. So the government, using all of our collective tax dollars, steps in to bridge the gap and help. What that means is we are essentially paying Walmart's labor costs for them through our taxes. But that's not where it ends. Because remember, it's a closed loop. Where do those workers spend those food stamps? Well, they spend them at the place where their budget goes the furthest, which is Walmart, who can again afford to have the lowest prices because they don't pay their workers. Nationally, Walmart captures about 25% of all SNAP spending in America. The American taxpayer is subsidizing the wages and revenue of the Walton family. They get to be among the richest people on earth, not because they are innovators, not because they worked so much harder, but because they found a way to legally turn the U.S. Treasury into their personal company store scrip. They pay their workers slave wages. The government has to step in so they survive. And then those workers are forced to turn around and spend their money at the same company that pays them so poorly. It is a vicious and terrible and cruel cycle. Now, some people hear that and they say, oh, okay, well, look, at least we have a safety net. But that tells me that you guys haven't actually looked at that net. In most states, if you are on either Social Security insurance or SNAP, food stamps, you are subject to asset limits. This is one of the most hidden cruelties in our system because most people don't even understand what that means. But to qualify for help, to qualify for food stamps, to qualify for SSI, in most states, you cannot have more than $2,000 to $3,000 in countable assets. And that basically means anything that you own at all. So think about how truly insane that is. If you're trying to move to a better neighborhood, for example, you need a security deposit and first month's rent and frequently last month's rent. Usually that's going to be a few $1,000s. But if you somehow scrape together and save that few $1,000s, guess what? You're too rich for food stamps. You don't get them anymore. If you own a car, basically any car nowadays that drives is going to be worth more than a few $1,000s. Well, guess what? You're disqualified. We have legally mandated that if you are poor, you must stay poor because you're not allowed to build a rainy day fund that is going to allow you to escape this cycle of poverty. No, you are in a cage with a few $1,000s ceiling. And don't even get me started on how people get trapped in this cycle of poverty to begin with, because the poverty line itself is a complete fabrication. The official U.S. poverty measure was created in 1963 by a woman named Molly Orshansky. In 1963, she figured that a family spent about 1/3 of their income on food. So she took the cost of a basic food basket and multiplied it by 3. That's it. That's the math we still use nowadays when we try and determine where the poverty line should be. But obviously, in 2025, food is not your biggest expense. Rent is. Healthcare is. Childcare is. But the issue is that if they decided to update how the poverty line was established, all of a sudden, instead of having a poverty rate of 10 to 12%, it would jump up. It could jump up to 40%, 50%. And no administration wants to be the administration that suddenly tripled the poverty level in the United States. And no matter how stupid that sounds, because obviously they didn't just create poor people out of thin air, they really just acknowledged that a massive group of people is truly impoverished when they're not being counted that way. That's how it would be portrayed in the media. So, for example, a family of 4 in the United States right now isn't under the poverty threshold unless they're making like $32,000 a year as a household. That's not for each parent. That is total. I mean, if you're a single person, the poverty threshold is like $15,000. That is, it's embarrassing. It's unrealistic. But no administration wants to be the one to admit that 100 million Americans are living in desperate poverty. So we're going to keep on pretending that the math in 1963 of take a grocery bill and multiply it by 3 is actually legit. And this, by the way, is also a huge part of why parents and grandparents and older generations just don't seem to get it. It's not clocking with them. In 1968, the federal minimum wage was $1.60. And if you adjust that for inflation and actual purchasing power, a full-time worker in 1968 could keep a family of 3 above the poverty line. Today, a full-time worker on the federal minimum wage earns $15,000 a year. There is not a single county in the entire United States that you could afford a standard 2-bedroom apartment on $15,000 a year. Not one single county. And as far as purchasing a house, I mean, this is basically the nail in the coffin on the American dream, because in the 1970s, the median home price was about 3 times the average annual salary. You worked for a few years, you saved up, you bought a house. It was the American dream. Today, in big cities, that ratio is like 10 times the average salary. But it's not just that, prices are for some reason going up. No. In 2025, you're not bidding against other families. It's not like you're trying to outbid somebody else who's also trying to just move into the area. No, you're bidding against BlackRock and Vanguard, who can give cash offers. Institutional investors bought roughly 25% of all single-family homes this year. They are using billionaire capital to buy the houses in cash so that they can turn you into a permanent renter in your own neighborhood. Instead of shelter being considered a human right as it rightly should be, it's now turned into an asset in this game of chess that hedge funds play. And speaking of these corporations, we're told that capitalism is about competition, the free market, that the best product wins and the consumer gets to benefit from that. But in 2025, that's a comforting fairy tale. Go to your kitchen right now. Take a look in your pantry. Go look at your cereal, your soda, your cleaning supplies. You'll see 100 different logos, but if you look at who owns those particular brands, you'll find that almost every single thing that you eat or use is owned by about 10 corporations. Nestle, PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, Unilever, Procter & Gamble. They don't really compete with each other. They've just agreed to carve up the map. But it's even worse when you get to the financial world. BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street are the big three asset managers. Combined, they manage over $20 trillion. To put that into perspective, they have significant ownership stake in basically every single company in the S&P 500. So just take a step back, think about that. If there is one hedge fund that owns a piece of Delta, United, and American Airlines, why would those airlines ever actually be competing with each other? The answer is they won't. They don't have to. Because we don't have a truly free market. We have a planned economy run by a handful of guys in Manhattan who own both sides of every competition so that they will always come out on top. You have the illusion of choice between 20 different brands of whatever you want, but the money is going to end up in the same pockets. So when did everything go wrong? When did this ladder get pulled up and leave working class Americans in the lurch? When did the everyman, everyday worker start losing ground? Well, actually, it's surprisingly simple. You can take a look at a graph of American wages versus productivity. And there is a specific moment where the lines just snap apart forever and never come back together again. It's called the Great Decoupling, and it started in 1981. Before Ronald Reagan took office, the top marginal tax rate, so the highest tax bracket that existed, the rate that the wealthiest Americans were paying on the heights of whatever wealth they accumulated in a year, was 70%. Now, when you hear people talking about Make America Great Again, usually they refer back to the golden age of America in the 1950s under, like Eisenhower. Well, back then, the highest tax rate was 91%. Then came Ronald Reagan. He promised us trickle-down economics. He said if we slashed those high tax rates for the highest earners, those people who are the real job creators, well, they would take all that extra money that they had all of a sudden from not having to pay too much in taxes, and they'd be reinvesting that straight into your pocket. They would invest in better infrastructure for their company. They would give you better wages. They'd be able to hire more workers and decrease unemployment. But they lied. Ronald Reagan took that 70% rate down to 28% by the time he left office. And that money, it never trickled down, it pooled. It stagnated at the top. Since 1979, American worker productivity has risen by 64%, but wages have only grown by 14%. That missing 50% there is the greatest heist that has ever been performed in human history. We stopped building public universities and highways and infrastructure, and we stopped investing in education and the health of our citizens, and we started funding the creation of our billionaire aristocratic oligarchs. So, okay, I know what you're thinking. If it's that bad, well, just vote to change it, right? I mean, Ronald Reagan lowered the tax rates. Surely somebody can just raise them again. It shouldn't be that hard. Well, let's fast forward a little bit. There was a little case in 2010 that the Supreme Court ruled on, fondly referred to now as the Citizens United case. That ruling essentially decided that money is a form of speech, and that corporations are also allowed freedom of speech. And when you combine those two findings, democracy becomes an auction. In 2025, we are living in a $1, one vote system. You look at a group like AIPAC, for example. They are extremely well known for this. It stands for the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. In the 2024 election alone, they spent over $100 million to influence American elections. Frequently, they would be pulling for a specific type of candidate. That candidate is whoever was running against a progressive candidate. But it's obviously not just AIPAC, it's the fossil fuel lobby, the gun lobby, big pharma. In fact, an incredibly eye-opening study I read was done at Princeton in 2014, only 4 years after the Citizens United case. It showed that the preferences of the average American, even constituents of a given politician, have essentially zero impact on what laws actually get passed, a statistically insignificant impact. But if the top 10% of donors, of corporate sponsors want a law, well, that matters. The probability of it getting passed then skyrockets. Because the truth is, your vote is a whisper. But a $50 million donation from a billionaire is a megaphone. We aren't really voting for leaders anymore. We're not voting for a politician. We're voting for which billionaire's interests get represented the most this term. The truth is, there's only so much you and I can do as individual voters. Sure, we can say we won't vote for you if you don't pass X, Y, or Z. Sure. But the honest truth is, us saying we won't vote for somebody is never going to be as important to these politicians as $1 million donation. It's just not. Because they can take that money and they can use it to advertise and get more votes. And they can use it for a lot of other things too. It's just so much more useful for these politicians to follow the money than it is to truly represent their constituents. But I think there is one last open secret to the puzzle that is the truly most terrifying symptom of the system that we're in right now. See, every corporation that is publicly traded, meaning every corporation that you can buy a stock in, has what is called a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders. And that means that they are legally required to try and maximize profit for people that invest in their company. They're not allowed to just say, well, we think X, Y, or Z is more important than making money, so we're going to do this. And that includes things like ethics, morals, saying it's just the right thing, so we're going to do it. And one of the most really poignant examples of that is this United Healthcare case. In early 2025, a federal judge allowed a lawsuit to proceed against them for using an AI tool called NHPredict. The lawsuit alleges that United Healthcare used this AI to systematically deny claims for elderly patients, even when doctors said they needed care. So, okay. Big corporation is using AI to do workers' jobs. That's not a big surprise, right? The really disturbing part is that internal reports showed that the AI had a 90% error rate. But they kept using it on purpose because they knew that less than 1% of patients would appeal. They gambled that these patients would die before they could sue. And it worked. In a system governed by a fiduciary duty to shareholders rather than any kind of morality or ethics, your survival could literally be a breach of their contract. Because not only did United Healthcare get sued for using an AI that had a 90% error rate to shut down claims, shareholders sued United Healthcare because after their CEO was brutally assassinated, they started approving claims en masse. Gee, what a shock. But their shareholders didn't like that. They said, you are saving too many lives and that is costing us too much money. You are not fulfilling your fiduciary duty to us. Shareholders have no concept of a moral duty or an ethical dilemma. They have no concept of humanity. Shareholders demand and claw and scrape and steal and kill for the almighty dollar. Charles Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol as a warning. He showed us a man who hoarded wealth while his neighbor's son died, and he called that man a monster. Today, economists would call him a visionary. But there is good news, because we wrote the rules of this game and we can rewrite them. But to fix this, we need big changes. We need to get money out of politics. Reverse Citizens United immediately and move to publicly funded elections. Politicians should not get a leg up for taking on as many corporate sponsors as they can. There should be no advantage to bowing to the desires of big oil or big pharma instead of your own constituents. There should be no advantage gained by simply having access to a bigger war chest, because we have already seen that will be abused time and time again. In most other fully developed Western nations, they have publicly funded elections. You don't have campaign drives for Republicans or Democrats sending you incessant text messages trying to get you to give them more and more money. Everybody works on an even playing field. And the most persuasive argument is the one that wins, not whoever has the biggest wallet. We need to ban hedge funds from buying single-family homes. Housing is for families. It's not for BlackRock's portfolio. The right to live, the right to shelter is a universal human right. And I don't care if these corporations acknowledge that or not. We desperately need to update the math behind the poverty line. It is laughable that we still use math based on multiplying a basket of groceries by 3. I mean, it genuinely is a tragedy, and it could so easily be fixed. We can analyze data in a much better way to determine what the real actual poverty line is and should be considered, so that we can finally see how many of our neighbors are truly struggling. And finally, we desperately need to get rid of these dynasties of wealth. 2025 was the first year where more billionaires were created through inheriting wealth than through their own financial decisions. And that number is not going to shrink anytime soon. It's going to get bigger. But these dynasties, these people built entirely on the back of a family name who never earned a dollar in their life, they need to pay their fair share. We can return to a 70% tax rate. We did it before. There is no reason we shouldn't be able to return to those levels of taxation of the wealthy. Trickle-down economics does not work. It has never worked. And it's time to stop pretending like it might one day start to work for no reason. Economic inequality is not some force of nature. It's not some unavoidable consequence of society. It is an engineering project. And it's time we start building something for all of us instead of just the billionaire elite owning class. My name is Daniel Clower. Thank you again so much for listening to episode 23 of Awakening the Ordinary. Please feel free to leave a comment below. I would love to hear your thoughts. If there's anything you think I missed, please chime in below. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.